Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different with the book review today. And it's going to be on The Ethics of the Climate Crisis by Robin Attfield. This was sent to me by Polity Press, along with Being Philosophical by Stephen Hetherington. So thank you so much to them for that. I'll be getting that one hopefully done later this month. But like I said, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about it for a minute here, but then we're going to go over to the desk and I'm going to go through some of the notes I took on it, just because, I don't know, I just felt it would be something a little bit different with some of the philosophy stuff that I'm going to talk about and everything. For those who don't know, I do have a philosophy Discord. I think we got 30 or 40-ish people talking about philosophy books and everything. I think this month we're doing Descartes and everything, but I've been trying to branch out and actually take philosophy a little bit more seriously, and obviously read a lot of nature books. You know, if you've been following the channel for any length of time, you probably already know that. So I did want to read a book kind of dedicated to sort of environmental or climate justice, just because it is touched upon in a lot of books. And like I said, I don't know, I'm so rusty on a lot of my philosophy things and everything. I just figured I'd take some notes, try to see what I can get from it and everything like that. So let's just go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's just give this a shot and see how it goes. Still haven't made up my mind on whether I kind of like this format or not, so leave a comment down below if you like this presentation style, or also if you think it sucks, just so I can hear your all thoughts on it as well. Now, we're not going to be going through like line by line just because there's like 6 pages of notes, but I could do maybe a little bit of, like, I was thinking like a chapter kind of overview for each one I took notes on, which in this book happened to be at least a tiny bit in each one. But chapter 1 is definitely just kind of a little tiny overview on like what the scope of the book is. Though I did like how when people talk about, you know, we have a responsibility for climate change. Who is we? Is it individuals? Is it governments? Is it businesses and corporations? You know, so I did like that kind of mindset going into it. And then, you know, sadly, we go right into chapter 2. And unfortunately, even on a book on like, you know, ethics of climate change, you have to have this giant chapter on just the science backing up the climate crisis, what is causing like global heating and extreme weather events and stuff like that. It's actually very well done. You have like the increases of different emissions, the deforestation is talked about, melting of the ice caps, stuff like that. So it is actually a very good, it's probably one of the best like one chapter overviews I've read in quite a while, and it's quite up to date. Most of the studies are like around 2022, 2020. There is even a few 2023 ones, so it's pretty up to date. So you are dealing with some really good science. It's just kind of sad that you have to have this giant chapter just to kind of get the naysayers out of the way right from the get-go. Then you move on to chapter 3, which was on a topic. I've read a lot about biodiversity loss, but not so much on air pollution. And it kind of talks about how these things are intertwined and actually, you know, affect contemporary populations around the planet in pretty significant ways and stuff. And especially on air pollution, I did not realize quite how extensive air pollution has become. Even just like, excuse me, ambient air pollution in rural areas can still be quite significant, which is kind of annoying for me because I kind of thought I was like immune to that, being in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods and whatnot. But so those are kind of like the big 3 kind of talking points as the climate crisis. You have air pollution, biodiversity loss, and extreme weather and kind of like the heating and stuff. Other stuff such as pollution is also, like plastic pollution is talked about a little bit as well. Then we move into like kind of the more meat of the book with chapters 4 and 5 dealing with the more ethical stuff. The big takeaway for me in chapter 4 with the ethics was a big discussion on whether contemporary populations and societies owe any obligations or rights, or I guess, do we owe any obligations to future populations, and do future generations essentially have rights? And if they do, are we, you know, effectively, you know, breaking those obligations towards future generations and stuff? This a lot of times is actually just kind of taken for granted, and a lot of like nature books that I read, you know, it's just kind of assumed, oh yeah, like future generations have the same, you know, rights and standing as contemporary populations and stuff. But then I've read like other things, like I know like the John Rawls like kind of theory of justice sort of stuff almost kind of implies like future generations can't have rights, just because they can't get into like bargaining agreements and everything like that, because they don't exist yet. But there's actually a really big discussion on that, and the big takeaway for me is even if future populations technically don't have rights, in the sense that we kind of like always talk about it, what it kind of boiled down to me was we definitely still have obligations to future generations, and this is kind of discarding the fact that even contemporary populations are still affected by all these things. But future generations, we do owe obligations to, just because they will have, basic needs, such as, water and like the big one is, a habitable place to live. So if we are affecting that, that actually is quite a problem. The book too definitely kind of skirts the issue a little bit of like which ethical theory one kind of prescribes to, whether it's deontology and duty ethics, or utilitarianism and stuff like that. I think the author is a consequentialist from what I could gather, though he said he apparently he has a whole like ethics books where he talks about stuff like that, just kind of on its own. But he does show how a lot of these things that he's writing about fit almost every like major ethical kind of framework. So it kind of doesn't get bogged down too much on, which one's the best and which one you should prescribe to and stuff like that. But then when you move on to chapter 5, which was probably my favorite because it's actually dealing with the people that are affected by the climate crisis. One of the interesting points I took away is there's actually an appeal to like John Locke with like his whole theory of property rights. And how you essentially have to there has to be a means for like future populations to have property rights, like if there is no effective like good property left. For example, with people that live on different Pacific island nations that are probably going to be underwater at some point in the near-ish future. What rights do they have? Rights to sovereignty and everything like that, but there's not really a good clean solution to how to like address that problem and everything. So I did like that one as well. And you kind of deal with biocentrism and ecocentrism and what their sort of pitfalls are. And I think I wrote it down somewhere in here. For example, like ecocentrism is kind of like the framework where ecosystems and individual species have a moral standing. However, it's to make a lot of these things kind of more effective, you have to kind of base it more on like actual individual organisms more so than the ecosystem itself and everything. So I found some of that stuff pretty interesting just because I've never read anything on those. And each chapter has its own like bibliography at the end of the chapter for kind of just like basic reading and more like further reading, which I really did enjoy as well. So I can actually probably show you one of those like right there with some of my little basic notes and stuff. So you have some like recommended reading and stuff, but then more on like some of them are like journal articles and things, but there's actually quite a few books mentioned as well. So I probably will be like data mining some of those bibliographies for further stuff. And then you go 6 and 7, the last two chapters I felt were a little bit weaker as compared to kind of the really strong science stuff, and then the two really big ethics chapters. Chapter 6 is kind of more of like a little overview of different like international and individual nations, like what they're kind of doing as far as like legal stuff to kind of protect the three different major problems with air pollution, biodiversity loss, and obviously carbon emissions. That's kind of like the big one. I don't know, like I said, it just felt like that needs to be fleshed out a lot more if you're going to include it. But a big thrust of these chapters too was more on how do you actually get anything to be enforced at that level, just because generally at the international level it's sort of like the sandbox thing where it's really hard to actually enforce things on other countries if they kind of renege or default on kind of what they promise and everything. But a big one that they're trying to push for is adding ecocide to like the Rome Statute and everything, which is pretty interesting because that's like crimes against humanity and crimes of aggression and stuff like that. So basically, wanton destruction of ecosystems and stuff would be considered like a high international crime. And apparently, there are efforts to kind of push that through without there doesn't seem to be as much resistance as like I assumed there sort of would be. So a big kind of like I said, big takeaway from this is trying to get international and like national governments to kind of recognize environmental crimes as something to actually take seriously. Just because a lot of the ones that even have them just don't really enforce it as well. And then the last chapter is sort of, I found, actually, I shouldn't have said, earlier when I was talking about 6 and 7. 7 is a little bit different. Chapter 7 is pretty short, but it's kind of dealing with their, how do you respond to the environmental crisis in the sense of a lot of people kind of just go all gloom and doom, and I've been, guilty of that as well. But they kind of talk about different pragmatic approaches, such as like John Dewey and stuff, on how to kind of examine like emotions like fear, instead of like accepting like paralysis and stuff, kind of avoiding, like I said, just sheer terror and paralysis, and then sort of apathy, and finding kind of that middle ground where you can actually make decisions and kind of like attempt to address the problem and stuff. So I found that kind of interesting. And also how the tragedy of the commons, which is, a pretty well-known concept where, if there's, a population that uses a resource in common, everyone kind of turns to their own self-interest and destroys it. The big example was Hardin's pasture land that a village uses, and it kind of gets destroyed just because everyone tries to let theirs graze the most and everything. But there's quite a few discussions, I guess, in this chapter on why that's actually not an apt metaphor for the climate crisis. Just because a lot of people become really nihilistic, and if we can't make other countries do certain things, right, it's just going to become the tragedy of the commons. Like common resources, such as like the high seas and stuff, are just going to be annihilated just because every country's out for themselves and stuff. So I found that one actually a little bit kind of ending on slightly on a high note. I do feel like there could have been like kind of more of a conclusion chapter just to kind of tie everything together and whatnot. But there you have it. Those are kind of my notes on all 7 chapters of The Ethics of the Climate Crisis by Robin Attfield. Like I said, let me know down below how you like this kind of presentation style. Like I said, I still haven't really made my decision yet, but thank you so much to Polity Books for sending me this title, and I'll be getting on with the other one as well pretty soon here. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you like philosophy stuff. Check out the Philosophy Discord if that sounds like your thing, and I will see you next time. Always remember, whether you're reading philosophy or not, read victoriously.